Hold on. Class is in session. Let's go. I recommend taking notes. I recommend watching Unit 1, 2, and 3. We about to get into real ball knowledge territory, okay? This is ball knower shit. But you have to know the goddamn fundamentals, okay? So again, make sure you run it back.
Slavery. It wasn't so bad.
It was always there.
Sorry, y'all gonna hear this weak ass chair, bro, all throughout this fucking video, bro, because this fucking chair just fucking sucks. So I'm sorry. But anyways, look, check this out. Colonialism and industrialism go hand in hand, okay? There is no industrialization without colonialization. That's why recapping and further developing on the context of Unit 3 is very important. So this is what we will be doing, okay? Now, before steam engines, factories, coal smoke, railroads, Manchester mills, and Britain walking around like it's a LeBron James of modern history, we got to remember what we learned in Unit 3, okay? Without colonialism, industrialization could not ball, okay? I mean, colonialism built the whole entire court. The ships were the court. The plantations were the court. The mines was the court. The banks were the court. The slave ships were the court. The colonies were the court. The navies were the security guards. The insurance companies were the whole front office. The bankers were the team owners. The colonial officials were like your refs. And the people doing the labor? Shit. Well, they were the ones getting crossed up, fouled, injured, traded, sold, and told to be grateful they were even in the arena. So when Britain finally industrializes, do not picture them as some rookie who walked into the league off of pure talent. Hell no. Okay, the Britain niggas is not him. Okay, Britain is not young LeBron carrying Cleveland by himself. Britain is the dude who inherited the whole franchise, stole half of the league's players, changed the rules, bought the refs, and then got on ESPN talking about hard work and innovation. I did this shit by my bootstrap. I got this shit from the mud. Man, fuck that. Niggas is not going. Okay, in Unit 3, we learned the truth. We learned the world market was consecrated violently. That means the global economy was not born from friendly trade. The global economy was born through pillage, plunder, slavery, conquest, stolen land, imperial law, colonial taxation, military occupation, mass death, and paperwork. Because empire loves paperwork. First they rob you, then they write it down, then they stamp it, then they call it policy. That's the playbook, okay? So you got little ball, you got middle school ball, and now we in the fucking big leagues, okay? Before the factory had a clock, the plantation had a whip. Before the factory had a manager, the colony had an overseer. Before the factory had wage labor, the slave ship had chains. Let me say it like this because we talking about ball knowledge and we keeping it on this little ball knowledge analogy type shit. The factory is basically KD going to the Golden State Warriors, okay? It's not a nigga getting the shit out the mud, bruh. It's not a ring that you gonna respect, bruh. It's not a nigga winning, for real. You know, this ain't winning. This ain't winning, this is stealing. Okay, the world market came first. And this matters because factory needed more than machines. The factory needed raw materials, cotton, sugar, tea, textiles, coal, iron, silver, opium, coffee, rubber, tobacco, spices. It needed workers. It needed markets. It needed barracks. It needed banks. It needed ships. It needed insurance. It needed navies. It needed colonies. It needed laws that made theft look normal. It needed violence dressed up as civilization. So boom, That's how colonialism set up the Industrial Revolution. Colonialism created the world market. Industry mechanized it. Imperialism armed it. That's the pattern. This is what you're going to have to do. If you've been around for Unit 1, 2, and 3, right? The pattern should be clear. History basically moves through conflict. The base of society is how people produce life, okay? Food, shelter, tools, land, labor, technology, property. Who controls production? Who works? Who owns? Who gets surplus? From here, society builds law, religion, ideology, race, gender roles, state power, police, schools, culture, and common sense around that material foundation. So when production changes, society changes. When agriculture develops, you get surplus. When surplus appears, somebody can control it. Okay? When somebody controls surplus, class society appears. When class society appears, you need a state to defend property. When trade expands, money becomes more important. When colonialism expands, the world market forms. When machines enter production, labor gets organized. When labor gets reorganized, family, life, city life, time, politics, consciousness change along with it. Okay? So humanity is learning, but class society makes learning violent. It's the sad part. Humans absolutely learn. Okay? We're adaptive. We are incredible. We learn how to farm. We learn how to build cities. We learn math, astronomy, religion, navigation, medicine, machines, electricity, computers. Okay? But under class society, every breakthrough gets captured by power. A ship could connect cultures. Empire turns it into a slave ship. Right? A mill could reduce labor. Capital turns it into factory discipline. A machine could make life easier. The boss uses it to speed up production and fire workers. AI could make our lives heaven, right? But we know they are going to make robots to put us into slavery. The internet could spread knowledge. Capital turns it into surveillance, ads, data extraction, and propaganda. That's why development feels insane. Humanity develops its powers, but those powers are controlled by the ruling class. So progress becomes wrapped in domination. And this is the whole point of me saying this. Colonialism and the Industrial Revolution connect because one contradiction feeds the next. The way they teach you in school is some bullshit, okay? They try to pretend like it was miraculous inventions and innovation and ingenuity and this, that, and third. No. This shit was built off of blood. Alright, and I'm just trying to emphasize what it took for the Industrial Revolution to even happen. Where the bread came from for our proverbial sandwich. We are starting with the world the steam engine plugged into. Because before Brennan starts dunking on everybody industrially, we have to ask, who built the court? Who paid for the shoes? Who got their land stolen so the arena could exist? Who got forced to make the jerseys? Who got sold to finance the team? Who got erased from the highlight reel? That is the real story. And to understand it, we're going to have to follow two things. People and resources. Because history gets real. Real deal for real, no spiel. When we stop treating systems like abstractions. Okay? Systems move through people. Systems move through land. Systems move through labor. Systems move through commodities. So look. All of this to say is that capitalism comes from a long line of niggas that cannot ball. The Industrial Revolution gets its sauce from colonialism. Colonialism gets its sauce from feudalism. And do not let me tell you where feudalism gets its sauce from. Because Rome was not sweet, okay? So this comes from a long line of niggas again that cannot ball. And they steal from the ballers. They stop real ballers from balling. They say no more balling unless you ball for me. Okay? And again, all of this, and you go back and learn in Unit 1. All of this happened basically because niggas started farming. God damn.
It wasn't violence and terror. It was innovation.
Before industrialization, the world was already deeply connected. We were already producing. We were already trading. We were already building states. We were already running bureaucracies, okay? We were already moving silver, textiles, crops, labor, information, and luxury goods across continents. Europe entered an already productive world, and that is key, right? Once you understand that, then the idea that Europe randomly became smarter than everybody else starts looking pretty fucking stupid. In actuality, what actually happened was a global power shift built on top of systems that already existed. Imagine you are a weaver near Dhaka around 1700. You're not a king, you're not a philosopher, you're not some European great man, you're just a nigga that makes cloth. That's it. But the cloth you make is so absurdly fine, people start calling it woven air. Some Dhaka muslin was so valuable that elites stored it in bamboo tubes to protect it from moisture and damage. Actual European travelers are looking at Bengal muslin and are like, what the fuck is this? Okay, we are talking thread counts modern factories still struggle to reproduce. There's actually a famous story of a Mughal emperor who reprimanded his daughter for appearing naked only to be told that she was wearing 7 layers of this fine fabric. The fabric was so light, so thin, so soft, so technically difficult that European elites were going bonkers. And this is hand production by workers, by families, by entire villages trained across generations. Already the whole Europe invented civilization while everybody sat around confused. Story starts sounding like some bullshit, right? Because before Britain industrialized textiles, Bengal was already running the league. The cotton itself came from very specific particular river zones around Dhaka. Humidity mattered, water mattered, soil mattered, labor knowledge mattered. Women spun impossibly delicate yarn by hand. Weavers worked the loom for months. Merchants coordinated trade routes. Ports moved cargo across oceans. This was a global luxury industry. The English East India Company starts buying Bengal textiles heavily in the late 1600s. The company orders rose from around 243,000 textile pieces in 1669 through 1670 to 2,450,000 pieces by 1717 through 1718. Bengal was one of the richest manufacturing regions on earth. Some economic historians estimate India made up around 20 to 25% or 1/4 of global manufacturing output before British industrial dominance. Europe is not teaching Bengal how to produce wealth. Europe is buying Bengal products because Bengal producers are cooking them in the market. That is Europe saying, please, I need this. Please send me more cloth. Okay, low key, Britain was getting hoop mixtaped. Okay, Britain was getting dunked on. Britain was getting shat on. Britain was pressed. Britain was jealous. And this starts causing panic back in England, okay? Because British wool and silk producers are looking at Indian cotton imports and are like, bruh, we're getting fried. So Parliament passes the Calico Acts in 1700 and 1721, restricting Indian cotton imports. Think about how good your fucking cotton has to be for niggas to have to ban it. Okay? The same civilization later preaching free market ideals, quote unquote, around the world literally had to ban superior foreign competition to protect domestic industry. At first, Britain has to trade honestly, meaning we bring silver, we buy cloth, we pay producers. But after the Battle of Plasley in 1757, everything changed, right? Like really, for real, no exaggeration. Paisley is one of the most important battles in modern history, and most people never hear about it. The East India Company wasn't even technically Britain itself yet. This was basically a corporation with private armies overthrowing governments. Robert Clive and the company used bribery, political betrayal, and military force to defeat Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowlah in Bengal, because Bengal commanders literally switched sides during the battle. Clive later returned to Britain absurdly wealthy. Parliamentary investigations eventually questioned how the East India Company officials were getting rich so fast. This is where capitalism starts looking less like trade and more like corporate empire. They start collecting tax. They occupy militarily. They have straight up political control. Bengal was rich, like big boy rich, big boy bucks. So when Britain takes Bengal, they're stealing more than land. They're stealing revenue, labor, markets, and productive power itself. So before conquest, Britain buys Bengal textiles, right? After conquest, Britain controls Bengal textile production. Company agents called Gomasta start forcing contracts onto weavers. Prices get manipulated. Competition gets restricted. Production gets controlled. Former company employee William Boltz writes in 1772 that Bengal became quote unquote one continued scene of oppression. That's a direct receipt from the horse's fucking mouth, right? From the oppressor's mouth, right? That's a direct receipt. A literal company insider. Britain industrialized while competing against highly skilled global producers, then used empire, military power, tariffs, monopoly control, and colonial extraction to reorganize the market in its favor. The world before industry was already alive. Let's look at China in the 1700s, right? Let's look at a merchant in Canton selling tea, silk, porcelain into global trade networks. And Britain wants access. Bad. Tea consumption in British explodes during the 18th century. Workers drink it, elites drink it, families build routines around it. Tea time, bloody fucking tea time, right? So, it's crazy if you think about it. Global capitalism started, really, like for real, really started with people becoming emotionally dependent on tea and sugar. It's just unreal. And for this, they will slave people. They will start wars. They will murder. They will do all type of shit. Here's Britain's real problem, right? Britain may want a bunch of tea and shit from China. Britain may have a lot of demand for tea from China. But at this time, and still today, China doesn't actually need shit from Europe, right? Yeah, the Qing Empire under the Qianlong Emperor already oversees one of the largest economies on earth. In China, they had massive agriculture, massive craft production, massive eternal trade systems, massive populations, right? Europe wants Chinese goods way more than China needs anything from Europe. So silver keeps flowing into China, right? To serve this demand. In 1793, right? Britain sends Lord Macartney to negotiate expanded trade access between Britain and China. And Qianlong basically responds with, "We possess all things," which is diplomatic language for, we don't need your little products, right? We don't need your shit. We don't need your bullshit. So imagine traveling across the planet to flex, and the emperor basically says, "Nah, we're good. We're good off you." So China basically told Britain, we have everything we need. And Britain took that personally, right? Britain like really took that shit to the heart. Like they was not finna let this shit go. And mainstream history acts like Europe was automatically the center of the universe, and that's just not the case. They was taking L's for a long time. For a long time, Europe was trying to break into systems that centered elsewhere. Europe later claimed superiority while spending centuries trying to access Asian markets. That's interesting. right? Now let's move into the Ottoman Empire around the 1500s through the 1700s. Imagine you are an Ottoman tax official, which may sound boring until you realize these people are managing one of the largest administrative systems on earth. Land records, population counts, crop assessments, revenue collection, trade routes, military logistics. The Ottoman state uses giant tax registers called Tehir Defterleri, documenting villages, taxable resources, agricultural production, and population counts across territories. This is bureaucracy, right? This is organized governance. This is administration. The Ottoman Empire was categorizing land, crops, and taxes while Europeans later act like everybody outside of Europe was just wandering around confused and uncivilized. It's just crazy. These niggas were basically running spreadsheets before Excel existed, okay? And just to call niggas primitive is crazy because the scale of the Ottoman administration was massive. I mean, just massive. We're talking like millions of people, bro, across 3 continents. Mind you, bro, before it was like hundreds of thousands of people was a lot of people. Okay, Balkans, Anatolia, the Arab world, North Africa, caravans moving goods across huge distances. One Ottoman traveler, Evliya Çelebi, spends decades traveling across the entire empire, documenting cities, markets, languages, ports, food, architecture, and trade routes. That is important because it shows that these societies were deeply organized and interconnected long before industrial Europe dominates globally. And another thing that people tend to forget or are purposely forgetting is that Ottoman Empire sat right in the middle of the global world. Let's be real. The Ottoman Empire also participated in slave trading networks stretching across Africa, the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Enslaved people moved through military systems, domestic labor systems, and elite households and agricultural work. Again, slavery existed globally before capitalism. The difference is industrial capitalism turned slavery into mass commodity production tied directly to world markets. That distinction is very important. And these fucking fascists, everybody was in slavery. Okay, buddy, not for the shit you have though. Okay, since the Middle East, Western Asia is the Middle East because it sits in the middle of the fucking planet. Okay, so Europe spent centuries trying to bypass Ottoman controlled trade networks to access Asian goods directly. Part of the reason Atlantic colonialism explodes is because European powers wanted alternative trade routes around older systems they did not control. Now let's move into West Africa, because people still subconsciously imagine Africa outside of history unless Europeans are involved, which is insane, right? Because we all come from Africa. History starts with Africa. Long before industrial Europe dominates globally, right? West African states are running trade systems, military structures, agriculture, metallurgy, and regional commerce, right? Benin, Oyo, Dahomey, Asante, gold trade, salt trade, ironworking, textiles, agriculture, craft production. Portuguese visitors described organized cities and political systems in Benin as early as the 1400s and 1500s. Goods moved across the Sahara. Craft workers produced locally and internationally. Africa was not isolated from world history, right? And Africa is like fucking enormous. Like it's so big, it's genuinely hard for modern people to mentally process. Africa is bigger than the United States, China, India, and most of Europe combined. They got different ecological zones, different languages, different political systems, different trade networks. They got forests, deserts, savannas, rivers, coastlines, you fucking name it. Okay, development happened differently across regions because geographically and ecologically they were different. The resource abundance in many areas of Africa also meant that societies did not always face the exact same pressures Europe did around territorial competition. distance mattered. Nigga, we got so much shit. We don't have to like compete over anything, to be honest. Environment mattered, right? The knowledge of local terrain mattered, not fucking territory. But don't get me wrong, warfare absolutely existed in Africa before colonialism, obviously. Kingdoms fought, states expanded, empires rose and fell, but Europe later acts like Africa was uniquely violent, while conveniently ignoring that Europe basically spent 1,000 years turning itself into a giant battlefield, and that's the reason they had to colonize in the fucking first place, amongst other things. Everybody knew about Mansa Musa and how he turned up the whole hood, right? When Mansa Musa traveled through Cairo during his pilgrimage in 1324, stories say he distributed so much gold that he disrupted local gold prices for years and inflated the economy. Niggas in Europe heard all about this shit. Europe wanted access to African wealth, right? There's a huge difference there. And again, all of this is built off of the practice of slavery. I mean, slavery had already existed in many parts of the world before Atlantic slavery. The Ottoman Empire had slave systems. African states had captive systems. Europe had forms of bonded labor and serfdom. But Atlantic capitalism transformed slavery into something different in scale and structure. Now, millions of Africans were violently forced into plantation commodity production across oceans for sugar, cotton, tobacco, coffee, right? Humans simply became industrial inputs. And this also destabilizes West Africa itself over time. European demand for captives intensified wars, raids, and political fragmentation in some regions. Firearms entered trade systems, and entire economies started getting distorted around slave exports. So colonial capitalism doesn't just exploit Africa externally, it also reshaped internal development as well. And then there's the Americas, right? Because by the time industrialization starts taking off, the Americas have already been violently reorganized for extraction. Like I said, in Potosi, you got silver mines and shit, but all throughout the Americas, plantations, forced labor systems, shipping routes, colonial ports. Again, after silver is discovered in 1545, the mountain becomes one of the largest producing sites on Earth. Indigenous labor drafts force massive numbers of workers into mining systems. Silver floods global markets. Like I said, it had to flood Asia to feed the demand of tea that niggas in Europe had, amongst so much other things like spices and etc. from Asia. And then you got European sugar plantations exploding economically. The plantation already had quotas, surveillance, punishment, labor discipline, and production schedules before factories became iconic. Factories did not invent treating humans like production units. They optimized it. I mean, this shit was fucking sickening and horrifying. Imagine this system through the eyes of a child, okay? Around 1756, a young boy named Alure Aquino is kidnapped in what is now known as Nigeria. He later describes the terror of being separated from his sister, marched across regions, traded multiple times, and eventually forced onto a despot slave ship. And one of the most famous parts of his autobiography is him describing the Middle Passage for the first time. He is one of the few only people to describe the Middle Passage from a first-person perspective. He describes the smell, the change, the screaming, the sickness. Bodies just packed like fucking sardines together below deck. He literally thought the Europeans were cannibals coming to get him. Think about how horrifying the conditions had to be for a child to genuinely believe that. Plantation slavery helped finance the industrial world with cotton, with sugar, with tobacco, with coffee. All of this was feeding the global markets. The same Western societies talking about freedom and civilization were deeply tied to slave economies. Manchester mills and slave plantations were connected through one gigantic Atlantic system. And nowhere was that connection more visible than in Mississippi. By 1860, the American South was producing roughly 2/3 of the world's cotton. Enslaved people were picking cotton that crossed the Atlantic and fed British textile mills. So when you see Manchester factory smoke, understand some of that smoke started in Mississippi cotton fields. Bengal gets deindustrialized, Mississippi gets expanded, and Manchester gets rich. Same system, different locale. The plantation was already doing industrial logic before industrial branding existed. That's why the Industrial Revolution did not happen in a vacuum. It plugged into colonial systems already running at full capacity. The empire already had shipping lanes. Like I said, banks, insurance, ports, merchant networks, military protection, state-backed monopolies. Bro, the East India Company was basically Amazon with cannons. And low-key, this is also where money itself starts changing, because empire needed banks, insurance, debt systems, stock markets, investors, all that type of shit, right? The Dutch East India Company was actually one of the first major joint stock operations. Niggas could literally buy shares in empire, okay? Think about how insane that is. Think about how much shit that changed. Human suffering itself became investable, okay? Amsterdam traders could make money off of ships they never stepped foot on, plantations they never saw, and labor they never did. That is some lazy shit. That is some evil shit, right? Because this is capitalism becoming abstract. Wealth is no longer tied to simply land and gold. Now wealth becomes paper. Now wealth becomes shares, credit, speculation, debt. Money starts reproducing itself. All of this shifts wealth and productive power towards Europe before industrialization explodes. Then machines enter the picture. Steam engines, mechanized spinning, factory systems. Now Britain can produce textiles and industries that India had dominated manually for centuries. Now production scales harder than ever. Now industrial output starts concentrating inside of Europe. Now the balance changes. That's the pattern, right? The Industrial Revolution did not start because Europe was naturally superior. It started because the empire already had shifted the balance. And once we understand that, history stops looking like advanced people versus backwards people. And it starts looking like who controlled labor, who controlled resources, who controlled trade, who controlled violence, and eventually who controlled the machines.
You mean nothing.
Your land means nothing.
Okay, now let's talk about enclosure and the death of the commons. Now this is where capitalism starts turning into a full social engineering project. Because people ask, why didn't peasants just refuse factory work? Because they got removed from the land first. Capitalism needed workers badly, but peasants already had ways to survive. They didn't need work, okay? They were working hard enough. They had common fields, grazing rights, forests, rivers, gardens, animals, shared land, subsistence, farming, community, obligations, seasonal labor patterns, okay? Life was hard as hell under feudalism, yes, but if you still got access to the commons, you are not completely dependent on your landlord or boss for survival. And capitalism hated that shit, okay? Because a worker who can survive outside of the market is harder to discipline. So Britain starts fencing the world. Literally, we get enclosure acts. Between roughly 1760 and 1870, the British Parliament passed around 4,000 enclosure acts. Around 7 million acres of common land, or about 1/6 of England, got privatized. Think about that scale just for a second. Entire villages wake up one day and suddenly this field your family used for generations, yeah, that shit belongs to Lord Big Wallet now, okay? Get the fuck up out of here. And the commons used to provide firewood, grazing land, just community, fishing, food gathering, hunting, survival itself. Enclosure transformed shared survival into fucking trespassing. And women got hit especially hard here because enclosure and industrialization start separating paid labor from unpaid domestic labor. The household starts becoming responsible for reproducing workers, cooking and cleaning and raising children, survival work, right? While capitalism pretends only factory labor counts as real work. Pause for a second and think about what that really means, right? Every nigga has to be raised, fed, clothed, cared for when sick, and reproduced generation after generation, right? This baby shit do not stop. Factories do not create workers from thin air. These niggas ain't falling out of fucking coconut trees. Households create workers. Mothers create workers, right? Women were expected to perform enormous, and still are expected to perform enormous amounts of unpaid labor that kept the entire system functioning in the goddamn first place. The factory produced commodities, okay, yeah, but the household reproduced labor power its goddamn self. Capitalism depends on both, but only compensates one. Only one appears on the payroll. So simply, without the subjugation of the woman, there is no goddamn capitalism. Okay? Thank your sister, thank your auntie, thank your mama. Capitalism is just one broke, dirty bitch. So broke, so fucking dirty, always needs free labor, always needs slavery. Fuck, goddamn, it's so annoying. Whatever though, I digress. Let's continue because now survival has a price tag and they're not done. The same state that passed the enclosure laws also criminalized people once they became poor. You lose access to the commons, you become unemployed, you wander, you beg, you steal bread, you hunt on land your family used for generations, and now suddenly you are a vagrant, you are a criminal, you are a undeserving poor. They create disposition, then punish the consequences of disposition. And nigga, if you end up poor, too hungry, too desperate, you go into the fucking workhouse, okay? The British New Poor Law of 1834 basically turned poverty into punishment. Families were separated, divided, food was restricted and centralized. Labor was disciplined. Conditions in workhouses were intentionally made miserable because the state believed relief should be worse than the worst factory job. You sell your motherfucking labor or you suffer. This how it would happen to you, right? A surveyor would arrive, maps would get drawn, fences would get built, hedges would go up, deeds would be rewritten, and common rights would disappear overnight. A world that used to function collectively starts turning into private property. And the important part is this was legal violence, right? Not always soldiers shooting people. Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's court. Sometimes it's fines. Sometimes it's fences, okay? The state shows up and says this land belongs to Lord McRich Guy now. Oh, and your family being here for 300 years is fucking irrelevant. I don't give a fuck. Get the fuck off the land, okay? And once people lose access to survival outside of the market, they become dependent on wages. This is why people say enclosure helped create the working class. Now let's go to Scotland. Late 1700s into the early 1800s. The Highland clearances. This part is fucking brutal. Scottish clan communities had lived on land for generations under older social arrangements. Then landlords decided sheep are more profitable than people. Seriously, dead ass For real, one sheep operation could generate more market revenue than entire communities of tenant farmers. So thousands of highland families just simply get evicted. Homes are burned, villages are emptied, people are forced into rocky coastal land or pushed into migration. Some go to Glasgow, some go to America, some go to Canada. Okay, one eyewitness described landlord agents literally burning houses to force people out. Imagine watching smoke rise from your family home because the market decided sheep matter more than you. And think about what this shit does to a nigga psychologically. For real, for a second, right? Families that lived in the same area forever, for generations, suddenly scatter. Grandparents separated from grandchildren. Villages disappear. Local traditions disappear. Cemeteries abandoned. Community memory broken. Capitalism was reorganizing economics as well as reorganizing human relationships. You see this today with ICE. Whenever they want to consolidate power, consolidate wealth, etc., 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 they have to remove people, steal people, take it from them, take their ability to work, take their ability to survive, to assist themselves. That is class power reshaping society and telling you what is important. This is what the system will do. Oh, this was just a British thing. No. Ireland, English colonial landlords dispossess Irish peasants for export agriculture, right? During the Great Famine between 1845 and 1852, roughly 1 million Irish niggas died and another million immigrated. And what is crazy about this shit is that food continued leaving Ireland during said crisis. Livestock, grain, and agricultural products were moved through commercial markets while communities crumbled. It was a colonial catastrophe shaped by property relations and imperial policy. Okay, white on white violence is fucking traumatic. It's fucking catastrophic. That's why I always say this white fucking supremacy shit is bullshit. Okay, them British niggas did not have to starve Irish niggas, but they did, simply because it was more profitable to not feed niggas than it was to let them eat. In North America, indigenous nations were pushed off of land through war, treaties, massacres, and settler expansion. And at the end of the day, the material reason was the usual suspect: land. Cotton plantations wanted land. Settlers wanted land. Railroads wanted land. Gold rushes wanted land. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced entire nations from their homelands. The Trail of Tears killed thousands. Later, the destruction of buffalo herds devastated plain societies. This was some murderous shit. When they said manifest destiny, they meant manifest terror. It was a massive transfer of land and resources. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples were displaced as settlers claimed land under the doctrine of terra nullius, basically pretending populated land was empty, right? Crazy work. They always do this shit though, right? In the Caribbean, plantation economies turned land into export machines simply for sugar and tobacco. In Africa, colonial regimes seized land for mining, railroads, settler farming, and cash crops. In Latin America, communal indigenous land systems were getting broken down, broken apart for haciendas, plantations, and export production. Let's look at it. Let's dissect it, right? The world keeps getting reorganized around private property, wage labor, export production, and profit. Okay? This is primitive accumulation. This is the term Karl Marx uses. Primitive accumulation does not mean capitalism began because people worked harder or invented better ideas. It means capitalism was built through forceful separation. People separated from the land, workers separated from tools, and communities separated from survival. Marx basically describes it as the process that divorces the producer from the means of production. It sounds academic as fuck at first, but it's low-key simple. If people can survive without selling labor, capitalism has a big issue. So the system destroys independent survival. Then later textbooks show up like, wow, everybody voluntarily became factory workers. Industrial revolution moment. Every factories are better than farms. No, the fuck they're not. Nigga, no. A lot of people got pushed there, forced there, cornered there. Okay? So the important takeaway is this. Enclosure is not just about fences. It was about the changing of the meaning of life itself. Before, life was tied to community survival. After, land becomes a commodity. Before, poverty was often a condition of life. After, poverty becomes criminalized dependency inside a wage system. Before, people survived through mixed systems of labor, commons, family networks, and subsistence. After, survival increasingly depends on moolah, money, and shekels, okay? And that is the transformation. That becomes the foundation for industrial capitalism.
Me your soul. I'm wild. Give me your fucking soul. Give it to me now.
Now, capitalism has workers. Now the machine can fully turn on. And this is where the Industrial Revolution starts feeling genuinely dystopian. Because factories were social laboratories. Factories were experiments in controlling human beings. You're in Manchester in the 1830s. You wake up before sunrise. The sky is already dark from engulfing coal smoke. The river smells toxic, tastes toxic, is toxic. Brick buildings surround you everywhere. Factory chimneys vomiting black smoke into the air non-stop. And your alarm clock is the factory bell. And if you're late, well, nigga, don't be late, okay? Because if you are, you lose wages, you get fined, you get fired. This is one of the biggest transformations in human history. Time itself becomes industrialized. Before capitalism fully matures, labor follows a natural rhythm, right? Harvest seasons, rain, sunlight, religious holidays, community patterns. Factories hates all that shit, okay? Factories want precision. Factories want discipline. Factories need uniformity. The machine does not give a fuck if your child is sick. The machine does not give a fuck if you're sick. Okay? The machine does not care if your wife is pregnant. The machine does not care if you're pregnant. The machine does not care if you're tired or exhausted. The machine wants labor. Okay? The machine wants to work every day on time at maximum speed. And that's why historians call this time discipline. All right, industrial capitalism literally retrained humans to experience time differently. On some Albert Einstein shit. Yes, humanity had followed seasons, sunlight, harvest cycles for thousands of years. Now suddenly clocks dominate your life. Minutes become money. Productivity becomes morality. What? Being late becomes a character flaw. Rest starts looking lazy. Time itself becomes commodified. The hours were insane. In 1832, a worker testifying before the Sadler Committee, which was a major British investigation into factory conditions, they described work during busy periods running from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. Okay, 16-hour work days. Imagine being 10 years old and your entire existence is machine noise and cotton dust and darkness, bells and fatigue. Children work constantly. Okay, factories love child labor because smaller hands are useful around machinery. Kids are easier to discipline, and families are desperate for money, and we could pay these little niggas less, right? That's the contradiction. Okay, capitalism destroys your old survival systems, then sells survival back to you through wages. And again, the conditions were horrific. Hair getting caught in machinery, mutilating people. Okay, limbs getting crushed, fingers getting ripped off, lungs destroyed, caked in coal smoke and textile fibers. Factories were moving so fast that workers sometimes literally slept next to machines between shifts. One observer in the 1840s describes workers looking pale, exhausted, underfed, and physically broken. This is where the famous image of industrial England comes from. Black smoke, crowded slums, sick workers, tenements, dirty rivers, children covered in soot. Manchester's population exploded from around 25,000 people in the 1770s to over 300,000 people by the mid-1800s. That is one of the fastest urban growth explosions humanity had ever seen at the time. These industrial cities start functioning almost like giant human machines. Railroads bringing workers in, factories consuming labor, sewage overflowing, coal smoke poisoning the bloody lungs. Rivers becoming simply industrial systems of waste. Cities stop feeling human here and they start feeling mechanical. Because enclosure already pushed people off of the land, now factories were there to absorb them. And industrial cities became giant human pressure cookers. Entire families packed into tiny ass apartments. Okay? Open sewage in the streets. Disease spreading constantly. Frederick Engels, the motherfucking GOAT, Karl Marx's friend, who actually walked through these neighborhoods. And he describes Manchester in the 1840s as overcrowded, polluted, chaotic, and deeply segregated by class. Engels even wrote that wealthy residents could pass through Manchester while barely seeing the misery around them because the city itself was organized to hide working class districts. One of the richest industrial cities on earth at the time contained conditions that shocked contemporary observers. And towering over much of this period is one of the evilest bitches of all time, Queen Victoria. She rules Britain from 1837 to 1901. Now her travesty had one of the longest reigns in British history. During those 63 years, Britain becomes the dominant industrial, financial, naval, and imperial power on Earth. Victorian Britain covers almost every corner of the globe. India, Canada, Australia, large parts of Africa, territories in the Caribbean, territories in the Pacific. Strategic ports stretching across the world's oceans. One of the main reasons that Britain was so quote-unquote dominant is because they exerted so much power through naval dominance, okay? Just a little side tangent here. America paid very close attention to this and took some plays out of Britain's colonial playbook. America's Navy is one of the major reasons why it's able to exert so much dominance over the world. And America had to learn this lesson the hard way by getting belt put to their ass by the Moors in the Barbary Wars. Well, at least the first one, but I digress. Now back to Britain, because by the late 19th century, people began saying the sun never sets on the British Empire because somewhere in the empire, the sun is always shining. Victoria herself does not build all of this, of course, but she becomes its symbol. Her image appears on coins, stamps, government buildings, maps, newspapers, statues, and official portraits across multiple continents. Imagine being colonized in Bengal and you're fucking looking at Queen Victoria and the fear, the fucking terror, the disgust, all the amalgamation of emotions that she must have arised. The confidence of the Victorian age rests on industrial production, colonial extraction, global trade networks, financial power centered in London and the dominance of the Royal Navy. Steamships sliding across oceans, telegraph cables connecting continents, my nigga, railroads spread across colonies. The British manufactured goods and forced them to circulate across the world. And this is the infinite money glitch that they still use kinda sorta to this day, just with some more bells and whistles and shit. Okay, and some more contracts and some more paperwork. Neo-colonialism. Now, from the perspective of these fucking murderous colonizing British elites, this colonizing shit looks like the peak of civilization. They loved this organized terroristic extraction operation. This is why their ancestors still pine for and execute this terrorism to this fucking day. But from the perspective of the colonized people, again, it looks very fucking different. To the people they were terrorizing, it looked as simple as it was. It looked like barbarism. That's a contradiction of capitalism. Massive wealth creation alongside massive misery. Humanity becoming materially stronger than ever before. But who controls that productivity is the motherfucking question, because that is the motherfucking issue, okay? The wealth concentrates upwards. The worker produces more while staying poor. That's why Karl Marx later says capitalism creates enormous wealth socially, but distributes it privately. And factories start reorganizing family life too. Before industrial capitalism, home and work often connected more directly. Now labor gets separated into factory space. Men, women, and children all enter industrial labor systems differently. Women working textile mills, children hauling coal, and men working factories, docks, railroads, and mines. And all of this shit destroys older rhythms of life. Even food changes, right? Tea consumption explodes like we spoke about earlier. Sugar explodes like we spoke about earlier. And cheap bread and potatoes become survival food for workers. In fact, British tea consumption rises so aggressively during the 1700s and the 1800s that tea basically becomes industrial fuel. Workers drinking caffeine and sugar just to survive brutal factory schedule. Even like today, right? You drink coffee just to fucking make it to work. Global capitalism low-key literally got built off of sugar, tea, cotton, coal, and human suffering. Just like today, most consumers never see the suffering directly. They see teacups, dresses, sugar, cotton shirts, finished products. That's one of Marx's biggest ideas later, commodity fetishism. The labor disappears behind the object. You stop seeing workers and start only seeing products. That's the fuel mix, right? Sugar, spice, everything motherfucking nice, okay? And another thing, coal, right? Coal changes the motherfucking game. Britain actually sits on massive coal reserves. Now this gives factories the ability to be more flexible. They are no longer tied strictly to rivers for power. You got coal now, right? Steam engines running off of coal allow factories to spread harder and faster. Coal production rises from roughly around 20 million tons in 1820, right, to around 160 million tons by 1900. Okay, that is environmental transformation at a gigantic, enormous scale. And this literally changes the fucking air. London became infamous for smoke and pollution. Some cities are so covered in soot, people describe buildings turning black. Okay, and once you go black, you don't go back. Industrial capitalism starts reshaping nature itself. And this chapter of history creates a completely new type of human being, the industrial worker. A person disciplined by clocks, dependent on wages, living in cities, surrounded by machines, experiencing life through industrial time. And that discipline part is easy to underestimate today. Before industrial capitalism, many people worked according, again, to seasons, nigga. Daylight, harvest, weather, all type of shit, right? Now, bells ring, whistles blow, and clocks determine your life. Imagine a grown-ass man getting fined for showing up late by a few minutes. Imagine children getting beaten for slow production. The factory was producing more than fucking cloth. It was producing obedience. The identity of an industrial worker barely existed at large scale before this transformation. And now comes the dialectical part, right? Factories discipline workers, but they also concentrate workers together. Thousands of people laboring side by side under the same brutal conditions. Now, workers start comparing wages, comparing injuries, comparing hours, comparing the rent. And niggas start like putting the shit together. They start realizing, hold on, all of us are getting cooked. Now, I know this sounds like somewhat normal today, but for most of human history, ordinary people were told that political power belonged to kings, nobles, landlords, emperors, and aristocrats. Entire generations grew up believing hierarchy was a normal part of natural order. Workers organizing themselves was revolutionary because it challenged thousands of years of assumptions about who deserved to rule society. And that is where class consciousness begins forming. Not automatically, not perfectly, not overnight, but capitalism accidentally creates the very class capable of resisting it. And that's where class consciousness begins forming. Capitalism accidentally creates the very class capable of resisting it. A famous phrase is, they will sell the rope that we hang them with. The machine that was supposed to create obedience also created solidarity. Let's go.
I need my slaves.
Fucking stupid! Holy shit, my slaves are not
Fucking stupid.
shit!
Okay, now let's enter the contradiction that capitalism accidentally created. The factory was supposed to create disciplined workers. Instead, it created mad organized workers. Okay, it created niggas that was pissed off. Because once thousands of people start getting cooked together under the same system, eventually somebody gonna say, hold on, this shit not right. This shit not right. And that is the birth of the working class resistance. And this starts early, very early, because contrary to what people think, workers did not passively accept industrial capitalism. People fought this shit constantly. Riots, sabotage, union organizing, strikes, machine breaking, food riots, mass demonstrations. Now, one of the most famous examples is the Luddites. And people misunderstand Luddites very badly today. Modern people hear Luddite and think old idiot, scared of technology. But bloody no, that is not the case. The Luddites were skilled textile workers in England around 1811 to 1816 who started attacking machinery because factory owners were using machines to destroy wages, weaken skilled labor, and centralize control. These niggas, these Luddite niggas was not simply just scared of technology, right? They were anti-clinker. They didn't fuck with the fact that niggas was using technology to make people's lives worse. Okay? That's a big difference than just being scared of some shit. Imagine spending your whole life mastering a craft. I mean, this shit is happening today. You see niggas done coded away. Niggas done got all type of coding degrees, ITT tech, coding certifications and shit. All type of shit, right? And they just gonna replace you with AI. Okay? Imagine spending your whole life mastering a craft. And then some factory owner introduces machines, cuts wages, hires cheaper labor, and tells you, adapt or starve. That's what workers were responding to. The British state treated this resistance like it was war. Machine breaking became punishable by death in 1812. The death penalty. Yes. Think about how sacred private property becomes under capitalism. You could literally face execution over factory equipment. The state basically said, we will kill you to defend our mullah. And that's the alignment now. Okay, all the stars have aligned, right? The government, property, industry, police, law, all merging together, working together. And workers don't just resist inside factories, right? They start demanding political rights as well. Now we're going to talk about Peterloo, but before we talk about Peterloo, we have to talk about Waterloo and the man whose shadow hangs over 19th century Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon rises out of the chaos of the French Revolution. In 1799, he seizes power. In 1804, he crowns himself Emperor of the French. Over the next decade, his armies march across Europe, defeating coalition after coalition and redrawing the political map of the continent. At his height, which he was a little higher than niggas like to say, Napoleon either directly controls or dominates much of Europe. Kingdoms disappeared, borders changed, old dynasties were fucking just done, okay? New governments emerged. Millions of people suddenly find themselves under a completely different political order than the one they were born into. And here's the contradiction. Napoleon spreads many of the revolutionary ideals that Europe's monarchies fear. The Napoleonic Code abolishes feudal privileges in many conquered territories. Legal equality for male citizens expands. Merit-based promotion becomes more common. And I'm not glazing Napoleon, okay? That speaks more to the needs of his armies and not the content of his character. But basically, Napoleon pulled up and weakened already weakening old aristocratic structures, and at the same time, Napoleon built a military empire that consumed enormous amounts of resources and sends millions of people into war. Between 1803 and 1815, Europe is engulfed in almost continuous conflict. Historians estimate several million people died during the Napoleonic Wars. Entire economies were reorganized around military production. States expand taxation, bureaucracy, policing, and administration in order to wage war on an unprecedented scale. When Napoleon is finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815, Europe's rulers gather at the Congress of Vienna and try to restore stability. They redraw borders, they strengthen monarchies, they build alliances designed to prevent another revolutionary explosion. But the problem is that the old world cannot simply be restored. Once the genie is out the bottle, my nigga, you cannot put it back in. The French Revolution has already happened, my nigga. Napoleon has already happened. Millions of people have now seen kings overthrown, borders rewritten, laws transformed, and entire social orders overturned within a single generation. The ruling classes of Europe spend the next century trying to manage that reality. And that's the world that Peterloo happens in. Now we gotta talk about Peterloo. Okay, August 15th, 1819, Manchester. Around 60,000 people gather demanding parliamentary reform and political representation. Families present, women present, workers dressed in their best clothes. Then, cavalry charges into the crowd. Sabers swinging, right? People trample. And about 11 people were killed and hundreds were injured. And the name Peterloo is dark humor, right? It's a reference to Waterloo. Basically, the British state treated its own workers like an enemy army. Industrial capitalism constantly talks about freedom, constantly talks about choice and individuality, while violently suppressing democratic participation when workers become quote-unquote threatening. And another thing starts happening as well. Workers begin forming organizations, trade unions, mutual aid societies, reading groups, political clubs, working class newspapers. Because once workers were concentrated in cities, ideas began to spread faster. Now you got niggas discussing how much they getting paid, how long they're working, what rights they have access to, what representation they have access to, what ownership they have access to. And this period creates some of the first large-scale socialist thought in industrial Europe. Now, enter Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, right? Engels is literally the son of a factory owner, which makes this historically hilarious. Bro basically looked at his dad's factories and said, nah, this shit evil. Engels walked through Manchester, investigated Manchester, documenting slums, disease, pollution, starvation, and industrial misery in the 1840s. Then in 1845, he publishes The Condition of the Working Class in England. This becomes one of the most important descriptions of industrial capitalism ever written. And then 1848 happens, a very important year. Revolutions explode across Europe. France, German states, Austria, Hungary, Italy, workers, students, liberals, radicals, nationalists, all challenging political systems. And in that same year, Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto. Let's go. We made it, okay? Now, whether people agree with Marxism or not, which is not, big boy shit, right? Big boys agree with Marx. Big boys will know the fuck Marx was talking about, okay? If you ain't never struggled, nigga, of course you ain't gonna agree with Marx. If you a slave owner, of course you ain't gonna agree with Marx. But still, whether you agree with Marx or not, whether you're a pro-slave owner or not, you cannot understand industrial capitalism historically without understanding why Marxism emerges. Marxism emerges because industrial capitalism creates mass urban workers, mass inequality, mass exploitation, mass crises. That's the soil, the proverbial tree of Marxism grows from. And Marx starts arguing something radical, something dangerous, something scary. The working class is not just suffering under capitalism, the working class could potentially overthrow capitalism. And in 1871, workers in Paris actually briefly seized control of the city during the Paris Commune. Workers start organizing society themselves. Radical democracy, worker control. The ruling classes across Europe panic. Instantly, right? And France eventually crushes the Commune during what becomes known as the Bloody Week. Thousands were killed, but now the ruling class got proof that workers could potentially govern themselves. And that idea terrified the ruling class. And honestly, to this day, it still does. Another thing industrial capitalism creates is constant economic crises, okay? Boom bust cycles. Factories overproduce, markets collapse, banks fail, workers get fired. The Panic of 1873 helps trigger what people at the time literally called the Great Depression before the 1930s stole the name. Because there's always going to be Great Depressions under capitalism. It's a baked-in thing into the ideology or system. And that's another contradiction, right? Capitalism, again, is unbelievably productive, but constantly unstable. Too much production, not enough purchasing power, speculation everywhere, too much supply, not enough demand. The system creates abundance while keeping people still poor. And that contradiction right there just builds up pressure waiting to explode. Railroads, newspapers, telegraphs, migration. All of this industrial infrastructure also spreads radical ideas. Suddenly, workers in different cities and countries can compare conditions. A great example is the telegraph. The telegraph transformed communication in the same way that railroads transformed transportation. Information that once took weeks suddenly could move in minutes. Financial markets became more integrated because of this. Governments could coordinate across larger territories. Empires became easier to administer. Capital moved faster because information moved faster. The industrial system accidentally, dialectically, globalizes resistance as well. This shit is not just happening all in Europe. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion against British rule happens. Huge anti-colonial uprising. Soldiers, peasants, princes, workers all participating in different ways. In China, we have the Taiping Revolution, right? One of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Some estimates range from 20 to 30 million deaths. The movement was led by Hong Ji Quan, who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ himself. But, as always, religion alone cannot explain the rebellion. The true culprit in this case would be population growth, land shortages, poverty, corruption, and Qing weakness created the conditions where millions were willing to fight for an entirely different social order. Niggas don't just get up and do that shit. Your life gotta be fucking hard. Shit has to push you to dismantling the way of life, to confronting the powers that be. Chicago, 1886. Workers were striking for the 8-hour workday that you benefit from today. Okay? Police were cracking down. Tensions exploded at Haymarket Square after a bomb goes off during a rally. Okay? Police catch fire, chaos is just happening everywhere, and labor organizers get arrested. And several anarchists get executed, even though evidence was weak as fuck, even though they didn't do shit. That's why May the 1st becomes International Workers' Day globally. Workers literally died demanding not to be worked to death. Okay, the entire 19th century becomes full of uprisings because industrial capitalism and imperialism are destabilizing societies everywhere. And now the ruling classes start getting scared for real. Okay, because workers are not just starving anymore. They're not just taking this shit anymore, right? Workers are organizing. They're setting themselves up to fight back. And that changes the whole game. Now government starts slowly introducing reforms. Factory acts, mine acts, public sanitation, limited voting reforms. Cities didn't suddenly become nice to people. Cities and further the ruling class controlling them, profiting from them, feared unrest. A lot of rights workers have today were not gifted. People fought for them. People died for them. People got imprisoned for them. And industrial capitalism keeps expanding during all of this. Railroads are spreading. Telegraphs spreading. Steamships are spreading. Factories are spreading everywhere. The machine just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but so does the resistance. And by the late 1800s, the world is entering a new phase. Industrial capitalism is no longer satisfied controlling just nations. Now it wants the whole entire planet. And that's where we go next. Imperialism. The machine leaves Europe and starts reorganizing the entire globe at industrial scale.
Hungry hippo. Give me a flower. Give me a flower. Hungry, I'm a fucking hippo.
So imperialism is basically capitalism leaving the hood, okay? It's capitalism making it out the hood. Now, the machine is hungry. One hungry fucking hippo. Factories are expanding. Railroads are expanding. Steel production is expanding. Cities are growing. Industrial output is skyrocketing. Capitalism got 99 problems and markets is one, okay? Industrial capitalism cannot simply sit still. It constantly needs new markets, new slaves, new labor, new resources, new investment zones, new shipping routes. Profit must continue to rise. The machine must expand. And that's where imperialism comes in. Now, technically, empires existed long before capitalism. Rome had empire, the Mongols had empire, the Ottomans had empire, but industrial imperialism is different. This is empire powered by factories, railroads, steamship, machine guns, telegraphs, industrial finance, fossil fuels, and mass production. Now, conquest happens at an industrial scale. You're not just capturing village by village anymore. Conquest is happening at industrial speed, and Europe starts carving up huge sections of the planet, especially Africa, the motherland. And again, this shit is not just happening in Europe's overseas empires either. Industrial capitalism was transforming entire societies internally as well before Europe starts carving up Africa. At the Berlin Conference, we need to take a quick little detour to the United States because America was going through its own massive contradiction. The same century that produced factories, railroads, steamships, and industrial finance also produced one of the largest conflicts in modern history. Once again, a conflict over labor systems, property, state power, expansion, and who would control the future of industrial development. Because while Britain was becoming the workshop of the world and Europe was racing towards empire, the United States was heading towards civil war. The American system had a contradiction that it could not peacefully solve. By 1860, the American South is producing roughly 2/3 of the world's cotton. Cotton is the single most valuable American export. Millions of enslaved people are generating enormous wealth for plantation owners, merchants, banks, insurers, and textile manufacturers. The value of enslaved people themselves is estimated in the billions of dollars in 19th century money. Slavery sits directly inside of the most modern industries on earth. It is far from a backward leftover left from an earlier age. And this is important because people sometimes imagine industrial capitalism and slavery as opposites, but they were not. British factories depended on slave cotton. Northern banks financed the trade. Shipping companies transported it. Insurance companies insured it. The plantation and factory were part of the same system. And then comes the crisis. As the United States expands westward, the question becomes whether slavery will expand with it. Every new territory becomes a political battle. Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bleeding Kansas, my nigga John Brown, shout out to John Brown. Okay, the entire country is arguing over the future of slavery. Well, John Brown was doing a little bit more than arguing, he was popping these niggas about it. Southern elites knew exactly what was at stake. When the southern states began seceding after Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, they say it openly. Read the secession documents, my nigga. Again and again and again, they identified slavery as the central goddamn issue. The Civil War begins in 1861. More than 600,000 people die, and some estimates place the number closer to 750,000. Entire regions were devastated. Cities were burnt to the fucking ground, as they fucking should have been, because the people who were in them were fucking bloody traitors. Okay, I don't even like this country, but William Sherman should have burned some more shit to the fucking ground, okay? He did not put enough belt to enough ass. Okay, Sherman didn't go hard enough. Railroads were destroyed. Farms were fucking just done with. Families were shattered, but the war is not simply fought by generals, right? Enslaved people themselves helped destroy slavery. Hundreds of thousands flee plantations. They sabotaged production. They provided intelligence. They escaped behind Union lines. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers eventually serve in the Union Army and Navy. The system begins collapsing from the inside and out at the same goddamn time. And by 1865, slavery is formally abolished through the 13th Amendment. We'll get into that a little bit more later. One of the largest systems of legally protected human bondage in modern history was destroyed. But ending slavery did not settle the motherfucking question: who will control the post-slavery South? And this is where Reconstruction begins. Reconstruction is one of the most revolutionary moments in American history, and most people barely learn about it. 4 million formerly enslaved people emerged from slavery and immediately began building institutions of their own. Schools, churches, newspapers, businesses, mutual aid organizations, political organizations. Entire communities are being built almost from motherfucking scratch. The Freedmen's Bureau is established in 1865 to assist formerly enslaved people. The 14th Amendment is ratified in 1868, granting formerly enslaved people full citizenship. The 15th Amendment follows in 1870, prohibiting racial restrictions on voting for men, at least. Black political participation from here explodes for men, at least. More than 600 black men served in southern state legislatures during Reconstruction. 14 black men served in the House of Representatives. 2 served in the United States Senate. Public education expands dramatically across much of the South. Men who only a few years ago could legally be bought and sold are now helping write laws and govern states. Think about how radical that truly is. Just for 1 second, pause and appreciate this shit. For centuries, elites claimed ordinary people were incapable of governing themselves. Now formerly enslaved people are voting, holding office, serving on juries, organizing communities, and helping run society. Former slaveholders absolutely hated this shit. Violence explodes. Okay, organizations like the Ku Klux Klan emerged specifically to destroy black political power through intimidation, murder, good old motherfucking classic for they ass, lynching, and terror. Reconstruction becomes a struggle over who will control labor, land, political power, and the goddamn future itself. By 1877, Reconstruction is effectively defeated. White supremacist governments regain control across much of the South. A new system emerges: segregation, disenfranchisement, convict leasing, sharecropping, Jim Crow. Reconstruction reveals both the possibilities of democratic transformation and the ferocity of the forces determined to stop it. And America didn't just have shit going on internally, it had shit going on externally as well. By the late 1800s, the United States was entering the imperial game. In 1898, the Spanish-American War ended with Spain losing control over several colonies. One of them was the Philippines. But here's where the contradiction contradicts. Filipino revolutionaries under Emilio Aguinaldo had already been fighting for independence from Spain since like 1896. So when United States arrived, many Filipinos thought independence was finally coming. Little did they know that the United States was very fond of oppressing people, so instead they got a new empire. The United States purchased the Philippines from Spain for $20 million under the Treaty of Paris. And just think about how crazy it is. You will see this pattern fucking repeat over and over again. These fucking colonizers, these fucking imperialists will pull up anywhere and just get to drawing lines and shit and picking out what parts they own and shit without even going to the people, asking the people who live in these places that they're drawing lines around if they're okay with it or how they feel about it, or if they want to be fucking owned by anybody, right? Millions of people who never got asked were transferred from one empire to another like property on a contract. In 1899, war broke out between Filipino independence fighters and the United States. The Philippine-American War lasted officially until 1902. Though resistance continued afterward, American forces used reconcentration policies, harsh counterinsurgency tactics, and brutal, cruel reprisals. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos died from warfare, famine, and the usual fucking disease. And the justification was also the usual fucking culprits. American politicians talked about civilization, upliftment, and preparing Filipinos for self-governance. And let's just be for real for a second. Niggas don't buy a fucking colony so that it can govern itself. The gaslighting is astounding. Sound fucking familiar. Okay, because every empire does the same shit. Every empire says some version of that. The language changes, okay, yeah. The relationship always stays the fucking same. The United States had defeated a colonial empire and immediately started behaving exactly like one. Industrial capitalism has moved far beyond just creating European empires. It was creating new imperial powers. And nowhere was the competition between those powers more visible than Africa. Right, now let's talk about the Berlin Conference. 1844 to 1855 in Berlin, Germany. If niggas wasn't like, if we didn't know the horrid history of the world, right, this would genuinely sound fake. European powers basically sit around at a table dividing Africa on maps. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy. Not a single African society was invited. Imagine strangers walking into your neighborhood with rulers and paperwork like, yeah, we own this now, my partner is gonna own that over there, and this nigga I don't like. Anyways, I'm gonna just let him have this, right? That's basically what happened. They just went into some place that wasn't theirs, called it theirs, fucking carved it up, and stole it. And this conference accelerates what historians call the Scramble for Africa. And by 1914, almost the entire continent was under European control except for Ethiopia and Liberia. That's one single generation. Now, why Africa specifically? Because Africa has an abundance of resources. Rubber, gold, copper, diamonds, palm oil, labor, land, you name it. They got it in Africa. Industrial capitalism needs raw materials constantly. And one of the most horrifying examples is the Congo Free State. Niggas love to talk about Hitler, but they do not talk about King Leopold II. The Congo Free State was personally controlled by King Leopold II of Belgium after the Berlin Conference. And this was not technically Belgium. At first, it was basically Leopold's private corporate colony, right? It was basically his private estate, a whole country, a whole land. And the brutality was insane, was horrid, abhorrent, completely inhumane. Rubber quotas forced through terror, villages burned down, hostages taken, women, men, children raped, executions, forced labor, just cutting niggas' hands off, just like torturing people. right? One of the most infamous stories about the colonial forces cutting off hands of black children and men to prove bullets weren't being wasted. Really, really think about that. Your hand as a human being was worth less than a fucking bullet. Think about that psychologically. Industrial capitalism wanted rubber for bicycles and industrial machinery, electrical insulation, and eventually cars. And people in Congo paid with amputations and death. So when niggas when niggas say this shit cost an arm and a leg, yes, it did. Literally. Modern estimates suggest millions died under Leopold's regime. Some estimates range around 10 million. Though historians debate exact numbers because this shit was hidden. This shit was so abhorrent. And they gaslight niggas. They want to erase their history while preserving what they want to praise. Either way, doesn't matter what the fucking numbers were, they were catastrophic. I can promise you that. Whole time, Europe simultaneously calls itself civilized. If that's not fucking barbaric, then I don't know what is. That is truly the contradiction. Right? Industrial society talking about progress while committing industrialized atrocity. And this is where racism hardens into modern systems as well, because empire now needs ideological justification. You cannot violently dominate huge populations forever without creating narratives explaining why. So, pseudo-scientific racism explodes during the 1800s. Fake racial hierarchies, skull measurements, just bullshit, evolutionary nonsense, civilizing mission propaganda, the white man's burden. Britannica literally defined scientific racism as pseudo-scientific attempts to justify colonial domination. Britannica! Right? It has the empire's name in the fucking, shit, they even know. Now, so basically, empire had to invent fake biology. Empire also stole authority over knowledge itself. Museums filled with stolen artifacts, right? Anthropologists categorizing colonized people, skull measurements and shit, census systems, maps, schools teaching empire as civilization. Europe was classifying reality itself, and its conquering of the land, quote unquote, would allow them to rationalize theft, plunder, pillage. That's the vibe. These ideas become state policy. In the United States, slavery ends in 1865 after the Civil War. Okay, sure. But racial domination absolutely does not. We still have slaves today. By the 1890s, Jim Crow segregation spread like a disease across the South. Black Americans were locked into segregation, voter suppression, like literal racial terror. We know this. We know the stories, right? Sharecropping, convict leasing often function like industrialized slavery by another name. And it simply did. And in fact, black people were massively arrested and targeted for minor offenses, then leased out for labor to private companies. Mind you, these quote-unquote minor offenses were shit they just made up, right? Vagrancy, like we learned with London workhouses, not having a job after you were freed from fucking slavery is illegal. So now, nigga, I'm gonna put you in chain gang. And once you got in the chain gang, they gonna sell you to a fucking coal mining company, a railroad company, a plantation. Okay, so this slavery, we outlawed, we emancipated the slaves, but the slavery shit did not end. It just took on a new form. See, some historians literally describe conditions worse than slavery because companies had less long-term incentive to keep workers alive. Industrial capitalism, it adapted its evilness, abhorrence. Again, labor systems simply just changed form. Exploitation will always continue, no matter what the fuck they say or their laws say. And imperialism transforms Asia as well, because Britain never got over China saying, we good off you, nigga. I told you they took that shit personally, right? So Britain starts selling opium into China illegally on a huge scale. Mostly opium grown in British-controlled India. And think of, this is why, and you'll see why China hates drugs to this day. But think about the insanity here, just real quick. One colony producing narcotics to force open another market. That's capitalism. And by the 1830s, opium addiction becomes a massive crisis inside of China. Chinese officials start trying to repress the trade. Britain responds with war. The first opium war. Like, if I can't sell you drugs, nigga, I'm gonna kill you. And China loses. First opium war, 1839 to 1842. The Treaty of Nanjing forces China to open ports, pay huge indemnities, hand over Hong Kong. This is why Hong Kong was under British control until, like, I don't know, was it like 2018 or something? And or I think it was actually in the 90s when they, like, you know, gave over control back to China. But that's crazy, bro. That's crazy, bro. Just think about it. Like, Hong Kong just kind of became China in the 20th century. Everywhere else in China, niggas drive on the other side of the road. Only in Hong Kong do they drive on the British side of the road, okay? A foreign power drugging the fuck out of your population, then invading because you said we don't want to be addicted to fucking heroin anymore. That's literally what happened, okay? And the British like to call themselves civilized, bruh. They're glorified drug dealers. And this is why people get frustrated when history gets taught like Europe innovated and spread civilization. No, the fuck it did not. A lot of industrial expansion happened through military force, through fucking strangling niggas. Shit. Gunboats, debt, colonial administration, resource extraction. And railroads become huge parts and huge tools of empires as well. Railroads may sound like neutral technology today because we think transportation, but imperial railroads were built for the movement of troops, resource extraction, market integration, and administrative control. India's first passenger railway opens in 1853 from Bombay to Thane. And yes, railroads modernized modern transportation, but they also reorganized India around British imperial needs. Cotton moved faster, right? That's why we got trains. Not so you Indian niggas can get around. Troops move faster. Not so you Indian niggas can get around. Exports move faster. Empire moves faster. That's why we build trains. Not for your fucking convenience or your travels, nigga. Fuck you. Fuck you. And meanwhile, industrial capitalism also keeps transforming warfare itself. I'm talking machine guns, steel battleships, telegraphs, industrial logistics. The Maxim gun gets invented in the 1880s. One European machine gun crew could destroy entire forces armed traditionally. The technological imbalances massively accelerates conquest. There's literally a famous quote from Hilaire Bloch. Whatever happens, we've got the Maxim gun, and they have not. Cold, that's some cold shit right there, okay? That's industrial imperialism, summarized in just a few lines. But resistance never disappears, because where there is smoke, there is fire. Ethiopia, under Emperor Menelik II, defeats Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. That victory shocks Europe. The shockwaves, shocking niggas in Europe, right? Oh, bloody, oh shit. I can't call it out. We just lost some fucking slaves. Oh, bloody fuck. It's shattering. Because an African state successfully defeats European imperial invasion during the Scramble for Africa. This is a huge historical moment. It quite mirrors the Haitian Revolution. And across the colonized world, right, resistance keeps erupting. Anti-colonial revolts, labor strikes, nationalist movements, religious uprisings, peasant rebellions. Because imperialism destabilizes everything it touches. It's like Midas. But instead of shit turning to gold, it turns to shit. In crises. And by the late 1800s, another transformation is happening too. Capital itself, like capital, is getting bigger. Huge corporations emerging, banks emerging with industry, finance becoming more powerful, steel, oil, railroads, shipping, industry, industrial monopolies. This is the age of the Rockefeller, the Carnegie, the JP Morgans. Industrial capitalism entering monopoly phase. And all of these empires are now competing globally for markets, for resources, territory, trade routes, colonies, and naval dominance. The machine is getting armed. Okay? And that tension keeps building and building and building until eventually the entire system erupts into World War I. Which honestly was industrial capitalism finally turning all its machinery against itself.
War. War never changes.
Now, the machine is fully global. Factories are everywhere, empires are everywhere, railroads are everywhere, industrial finance is everywhere. And by the early 1900s, the world basically looks like a giant armed economic competition. Britain has colonies, France has colonies, Germany wants more colonies, Russia is expanding, America is industrializing aggressively, Japan is industrializing aggressively after the Meiji Restoration. Now Japan saw the writing on the wall, okay? I didn't mention that Japan was forcibly opened same kind of sort of way like China. Okay. So Japanese rulers concluded that industrialization was necessary to avoid becoming a colony themselves. Railroads, factories, modern schools, and a modern military expanded rapidly. But industrialization also fueled imperial ambitions. So we see Korea increasingly come under Japanese control before formal annexation in 1910. Industrialization was producing new empires the same way it was producing factories. Okay, the Japanese niggas said, instead of being the colonized, I'm gonna be the goddamn colonizer. Oh my god. Everybody is trying to secure resources, trade routes, markets, oil, coal, rubber, steel, shipping lanes, and strategic territory. And all of these industrial powers are heavily armed. War itself has become mechanized. Europe turns into one big giant powder keg. Germany unifies in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. Now, Germany is rapidly industrializing, okay? And by the early 1900s, Germany becomes one of the strongest industrial economies on earth. Steel production exploding. Chemical industries exploding, railroads expanding. Britain starts looking at Germany like, oh, nah, nigga, you trying to take my spot? Right now, the naval arms race begins. And this was basically like two billionaires just fucking dick measuring, right? With entire populations trapped inside of the consequences. Now, Britain launches the HMS Dreadnought in 1906. This ship changes naval warfare overnight because it makes older battleships basically obsolete immediately, ASAP. Big ass guns. It's fast as fuck. It got heavy armor. Now Germany starts building more battleships as well. Britain responds by building more battleships as well. Okay? Not everybody's just building battleships. Not everybody just dumping insane amounts of money into industrial military buildup. Steel factories are just running constantly. That means what? Niggas gotta work hard. Shipyards are running constantly. Weapon industries are booming. Okay? This is where we see war becoming economically embedded inside of capitalism itself. And another thing, alliances start locking countries together like dominoes. The triple entente, right? Britain, France, Russia, the Triple Alliance, right? Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So now, if one conflict starts, everybody gets dragged in. And underneath all of this, workers are already fucking pissed. Okay, colonies are already unstable. Nationalism is already spreading everywhere. Labor strikes are already growing. Socialist movements are already expanding. Europe looks powerful externally, but internally, tensions are stacking like crazy. June 28th, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria is assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. And mainstream history usually teaches this like one assassination caused World War I. This assassination caused World War I. But that is truly not the case. That assassination triggered the war, but it did not create the conditions for the war. The conditions already existed. Industrial rivalry, imperial competition, militarism, alliance systems, economic competition, nationalism, and colonial tension. The system was already overheating. The contradictions were already coming to a head. The assassination was just the spark that lit the prairie fire. And once war begins, industrial capitalism unleashes hell at scale humanity had never seen before. Machine guns just mowing down entire wave of soldiers. Artillery shells landing non-stop for days. Poison gas entering warfare, chlorine gas, mustard gas, airplanes used militarily, submarines attacking shipping, railroads moving millions of troops rapidly, factories no longer just producing textiles and fucking consumer goods and shit. Now factories are producing death at industrial scale. That is the truly terrifying part. The same industrial systems that built railroads and steel infrastructure are now producing machine guns, barbed wire, tanks, bombs, artillery, and explosives. Industrial production and industrial slaughter are one and the same. The earth itself gets industrialized for war as well, like forests being destroyed for trenches and coal being burned endlessly, landscapes cratered permanently, rivers poisoned, entire regions were transformed into mechanized death zones. This is a new form of ecological destruction at such scale that is actually truly horrifying. If I was Mother Earth, I would be like, what the fuck? I would definitely globally warm, do all the hurricanes I can motherfucking do to make sure these humans get the fuck up off me, because they are fucking shit up. They are not being good stewards. And meanwhile, governments massively expand state power during wartime. Propaganda ministries, mass censorship, food rationing, conscription, drafts, right? Modern surveillance and mass state management accelerate rapidly during World War I. The state starts reaching deeper into everyday life than ever before. This is where the modern mega state starts really truly emerging. Mass propaganda, national ID systems. You get your bureaucracy, right? Your surveillance, your food control, your industrial planning. Governments begin managing entire populations like logistical systems. And workers notice something as well. Governments always saying they can't afford social programs. Then suddenly war starts and somehow infinite money appears for guns, ships, bombs, and military contracts. That is interesting. And another major contradiction explodes during the war. Class contradiction. Because rich elites often stayed protected while workers and peasants were all up in the trenches dying. And that reality radicalizes millions. You know, butt popping, nigga. Right? And whether somebody agrees with communism or not, which you fucking should, this is the final contradiction of the Industrial Revolution. Humanity developed unbelievable productive power. Again, railroads, electricity, steel, chemistry, telegraphs, mass industry. Under capitalism and imperialist rivalry, those productive powers simply become weapons for conquest. And that's the point. World War I was industrial capitalism arming itself. World War I was industrial capitalism armed to the fucking teeth. Think about the irony, right? Europe spent centuries conquering the world, extracting resources, building industry, building empires, building machines, building armies. And eventually those same industrial systems turned inwards on Europe itself. And the whole reason why Europe had to colonize in the goddamn first place was because they were so busy fucking murdering and just killing amongst each other that if they would have kept this shit up any longer, they would have exterminated them fucking selves. So they had to go outside of themselves, export the violence to the entire world. The machine colonialism built, constructed, industry turned on, and imperialism loaded with bullets.
This is just the beginning.
Fucking slave. I love you.
If you've been here since Unit 1, everything should be crystal clear up to this point. In Unit 1, we learned how agriculture creates surplus. Surplus creates class. Class creates the state. And the state protects property and hierarchy. In Unit 2, we learned how feudalism organizes land, labor, obligation, kings, peasants, lords, and religious power across entire societies. In Unit 3, we learned how colonialism globalizes the system. The world market forms through conquest, slavery, extraction, shipping, finances, and empire. And now, in Unit 4, we learned what happens when that global colonial system plugs into machines. The Industrial Revolution. Right? Colonialism built the machine. Industry turned it on, and imperialism armed it. We watched Enclosure push people off the land. We watched peasants become workers. We watched factories reorganize time itself. We watched cities explode, coal blacken the sky. We watched cotton connect Bengal, Mississippi, Manchester, and the Atlantic slave trade into one gigantic industrial system. We watched capitalism transform labor, family, food, cities, gender roles, nature, politics, and consciousness itself. We watched the rise of factories, railroads, corporations, monopoly capital, industrial armies, mass propaganda, and global machines. We watched Europe carve up Africa. We watched China get forced open through opium and war. We watched industrialized capital spread across the globe, reorganizing entire societies around extraction, labor, and profit. And everywhere the machine expanded, resistance expanded as well. Luddites, strikes, slave revolts, anti-colonial uprising, trade unions, socialism, anarchism, Marxism, the Paris Commune. Because capitalism creates enormous productive power, but also enormous instability. That is the contradiction. The richer industrial society becomes, the more explosive it becomes as well. And eventually the pressure becomes too much. All of these industrial empires, again, Britain, Germany, France, Russia, America, Japan, Austria, Hungary, are all competing for markets, colonies, oil, coal, rubber, shipping lanes, steel, and global dominance. And in 1914, the entire machine just fucking snapped. World War I begins, and this is where the modern world truly enters its demon time. And the terrifying part is World War I does not solve the contradictions of industrial capitalism, it simply deepens them. Empires collapse, millions die, economies shatter, revolutions erupt, fascism, colonial unrest, financial instability, nationalism spreading, mass propaganda spreading, industrial violence spreading and intensifying. The machine survives the war and then mutates again. And that mutation is what we will be covering next. In Unit 5, we'll be going from World War I to World War II, deep diving. I know we got a little bit into World War I in this unit, but in Unit 5, we will be deep diving. The age of fascism, revolution, total war, economic decline, economic collapse. Economies just falling apart, mass propaganda, genocide, mechanized death, anti-colonial struggle, and the rise of the Soviet Union. The fall of old empires and the beginning of the modern geopolitical world. Because after World War I, the machine keeps going and it only gets worse. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry this took so long. I just got a new puppy. So that's also why. But I also be getting sad and depressed. But I just got my puppy. Like, I found him in a bush, literally. And he just saved my life. So, I love him so much. Shout out to Carl Bark. Oh, yeah. And this is future... Oh, shit. Oh, yeah. And this is future editing me, okay? And a nigga is smart, bro. I do not have to use ChatGPT. I have a fucking college degree. Okay, so... this right here is what I was reading, right? These are my fucking notes, okay? And they have, like, a chat GPT in this motherfucker right here. I don't use it at all or whatever, but that's what I was reading. So don't be, hey, you use your chat GPT. Shut the fuck up.